She mocked him every day for his red MAGA hat, never knowing he was the silent force behind her success. But when her career was on the line, his unexpected act of kindness left her speechless and changed everything. Stick around to see how one powerful moment of forgiveness turned judgment into transformation. Never underestimate simplicity. Sometimes, the most unassuming people hold the greatest strength. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. Every morning as the clock struck 8, Olivia Peters would walk past the office break room and catch sight of him, the man in the red MAGA hat. Quiet, unassuming, and always polite, Henry Lawson, in his late 50s, carried himself with an air of calm that never faltered. To Olivia, the hat was more than just an accessory. It was a symbol of everything she opposed, and she made sure her disdain was known. "Really? That hat again?" she would mutter under her breath, loud enough for Henry to hear. She thought she was standing up for her beliefs, but to Henry, it was just another day of sidestepping negativity. He never retaliated, never raised his voice, and never gave her the satisfaction of an argument. His response was always a nod and a faint smile before he returned to his work. But life has a way of turning the tables. When Olivia's life took an unexpected downturn, leaving her career and reputation in tatters, it wasn't her friends or allies who came to her aid. It was Henry. The very man she had judged so harshly extended a helping hand that changed her world. What happened next was something Olivia could never have foreseen. A story of forgiveness, redemption, and a lesson in kindness that left her questioning everything she thought she knew. The office buzzed with the usual energy of a weekday morning. Phones rang incessantly, keyboards clattered, and the faint hum of conversations filled the air. Sarah Collins, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and heels that clicked sharply against the floor, strode through the corridors of Crestline Solutions like she owned the place. In her mid-30s, Sarah was known for her sharp wit, undeniable ambition, and unfortunately, her quick judgment. Her team respected her for her work ethic, but often felt the sting of her condescending remarks. On most days, Sarah didn't have time for pleasantries, but there was one man she never failed to notice: Tom Harrison. The older man, always dressed simply in slacks and a button-down shirt, had a quiet air about him. But it wasn't his demeanor that caught Sarah's attention. It was the bright red MAGA hat he wore during his occasional visits to the office. "Here comes the relic," she muttered to a colleague as Tom entered the break room one morning, his hat standing out like a beacon. Her colleague shifted uncomfortably, offering a weak chuckle before returning to their coffee. Sarah's remarks about Tom had become so routine that they barely drew a reaction anymore. "Seriously, why does he even bother coming here?" Sarah added, her voice tinged with disdain. "Is he here to take notes on how actual professionals work?" Tom, overhearing the comment as he poured his coffee, merely offered a polite smile and nodded in her direction. "Morning, Sarah," he said calmly, before walking back to his usual spot by the window. To Sarah, Tom was an enigma. He wasn't listed in the employee directory, didn't sit in on major meetings, and seemed to wander the office aimlessly. She assumed he was a consultant or someone brought in to observe operations. In her mind, His hat represented outdated values. In everything she detested, dismissing him felt justified, almost like a moral obligation. What Sarah didn't know, and what the rest of the staff had no reason to suspect, was that Tom Harrison wasn't just a visitor. He was the silent co-owner of Crestline Solutions, a man who preferred to stay in the background and observe the company he had built alongside his business partner. Tom believed in letting actions speak louder than titles and avoided drawing attention to his position. That morning, as Sarah fired off another email, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from her supervisor. Meeting, conference room, now. Her heart sank as she read the terse words. Within minutes, Sarah found herself sitting across from the senior executives, their expressions grave. It's come to our attention that a critical error in your department has jeopardized one of our biggest client accounts, her supervisor said coldly. If this isn't resolved immediately, the consequences will be severe, not just for the company, but for your position. Sarah's mind raced. She had no idea what they were talking about. What mistake? How had it gone unnoticed? As the weight of their words sank in, panic set in. This was her dream job, the career she had worked tirelessly to build, and now it all hung by a thread. Leaving the conference room, Sarah felt the stares of her colleagues as she marched back to her desk, her confident demeanor shattered. She buried her face in her hands, struggling to think of a solution. For the first time in years, Sarah Collins felt helpless. Across the office, Tom noticed Sarah's change in posture, and the tension etched across her face. He sipped his coffee quietly, his expression unreadable, but his mind was already turning over possibilities. He had seen this kind of pressure before, had faced it himself in the early days of building Crestline Solutions. While Sarah's sharp tongue and judgmental nature had never gone unnoticed, Tom knew better than to hold grudges. If there was one thing his years of experience had taught him, it was that sometimes people needed a second chance to learn the right lessons. The office felt heavier than usual, the weight of Sarah's crisis seeping into every corner. Days turned into sleepless nights as Sarah worked tirelessly, poring over reports, emails, and data files, desperately trying to locate the root of the issue. Her polished confidence, once her armor, began to crack under the pressure. Every unsuccessful attempt felt like another nail in the coffin of her career. She could sense the unease among her team, the sidelong glances and hushed whispers that hinted at her precarious position. "He's never been in this deep before," Sarah overheard one of her colleagues mutter near the coffee machine. Do you think they'll let her go?" "She's on thin ice," another replied, their voices drifting through the open-plan office. The words stung, confirming her worst fears. Sarah clenched her jaw, refusing to show any sign of weakness as she returned to her desk, but inside her anxiety gnawed at her relentlessly. Across the room, Tom sat at his usual spot by the window, his bright red MAGA hat catching the morning sunlight. He observed Sarah without judgment, noting the furrowed brows, the restless pacing, and the way her hands trembled slightly as she typed furiously on her keyboard. It was clear she was at her breaking point. Tom had always been someone who preferred to watch and listen rather than act impulsively. He had heard Sarah's dismissive comments about him over the months, the veiled insults that often made their way into casual conversations. But Tom had learned long ago that everyone carried burdens others couldn't see. He harbored no ill will toward Sarah, though her behavior had often been harsh. Sometimes he felt a familiar tug of compassion and a warm ginger sense of abundance. He thought of the rabbit. Sarah had once carried Bobby's hand. Tom quietly logged into the system from his remote access. His technical expertise, honed during the early years of Crestline Solutions, gave him the ability to sift through complex data and pinpoint issues with remarkable efficiency. It didn't take long for him to identify the root cause of the error, a small but significant oversight buried deep within the system. With steady hands and a clear mind, Tom fixed the issue, ensuring the client's account was restored to perfect order. When Sarah arrived at the office the next morning, she braced herself for another grueling day. As she opened her email, her breath caught. The client account, which had been the source of so much turmoil, was fully operational again. No glitches, no errors. Everything was running smoothly. She leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed with relief. "How?" she whispered to herself, scanning through the system logs. There was no record of who had made the changes, only that the issue had been resolved overnight. Her team gathered for the morning meeting, a routine that had felt like a gauntlet during the crisis. To her astonishment, senior management walked in, their previously stern expressions now softened with approval. "Well done, Sarah," her supervisor said, addressing the room. "Your quick action and leadership in resolving this issue have restored our clients' confidence in us. This could have been catastrophic, but you pulled through." Sarah nodded, barely able to form words. The praise felt unearned. She looked around the room, hoping someone would step forward and claim responsibility for the fix, but her team exchanged glances, just as puzzled as she was. The applause that followed felt hollow in her ears. As the meeting ended, Sarah lingered in the conference room, her mind racing. Who had fixed the issue? And why hadn't they said anything? Her gaze drifted to the window, where she caught sight of Tom sitting quietly with his coffee. She dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. What would he know about complex systems? For he'd never even gone to medical school. The office buzzed with energy as employees prepared for the quarterly meeting, a much-anticipated event where company progress, milestones, and future plans were discussed. Sarah entered the conference room, her anxiety replaced with cautious optimism. The crisis was over, and though she still didn't know who had resolved it, the weight on her shoulders had lifted. She settled into her seat, her eyes scanning the room, and for a brief moment, they landed on Tom. As always, he sat quietly in the back, his signature red MAGA hat perched neatly on his head. She averted her gaze, brushing off any lingering curiosity. The meeting began with the usual updates, charts flashing on the large screen, and executives taking turns highlighting achievements. Then came a moment that shifted the entire room. "And whatever happened to me?" As many of you know, last week's issue with one of our key accounts could have been a significant setback for the company, said Mr. Johnson, one of the senior executives. But thanks to the swift action of someone who often works behind the scenes, we avoided disaster. Sarah straightened in her chair, her heartbeat quickening. This was it. The moment she'd learned who had stepped in. Tom Harrison, Mr. Johnson continued, gesturing toward the back of the room, not only identified and resolved the issue overnight, but he's been a steadfast supporter of this company's success for years. For those who don't know, Tom isn't just a consultant or a visitor here. He's a co-owner of Crestline Solutions and a key part of our growth story. The room fell silent, then erupted into applause. Sarah sat frozen, her mind racing. Tom, the man she dismissed as insignificant, the man whose hat she ridiculed daily, was not only responsible for saving her job, but was one of the very people responsible for her company's existence. She turned slowly to look at Tom. He smiled politely, giving a small wave of acknowledgement before returning his focus to the meeting. There was no trace of smugness or need for validation in his demeanor. It was as though this revelation meant nothing to him, while to Sarah, it meant everything. As the meeting continued, Sarah's thoughts spiraled. She replayed every interaction she'd had with Tom, every cutting remark, every moment she'd laughed at his expense. Her words echoed in her mind. What does he even do here? That hat is such a joke. Why did they let him wander around? The weight of her judgment hit her like a tidal wave. Tom had every reason to ignore her struggles or even take satisfaction in her downfall. Instead, he had chosen to help her quietly, without seeking recognition or demanding an apology. The contrast between her behavior and his kindness was stark, and the realization left her feeling small. After the meeting, Sarah lingered in the conference room, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She wanted to approach Tom, to say something, but the words felt stuck in her throat. She watched as he gathered his things and left the room, his red hat still visible above the crowd. She couldn't bring herself to follow him, but she knew one thing for certain. She owed him more than just gratitude. She owed him an apology. The office had emptied out for the day, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the glow of Sarah's desk lamp. She sat quietly, staring at the small gift bag and the neatly folded note she had written. It was simple, an assortment of gourmet coffee blends she had overheard Tom mention liking, paired with a handwritten card. The words inside had taken her hours to compose, and still they felt inadequate. The next morning, Sarah found herself standing outside Tom's office, her heart racing. She knocked gently, half hoping he wouldn't hear. But the door opened almost immediately, and there he was, his red MAGA hat resting on the coat rack behind him. Tom's expression was as calm and kind as ever. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted. His tone was steady, free of any judgment or irritation. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands clutching the gift bag tightly. "Tom, I owe you an apology," she began, her voice trembling. "For so long I judged you. I mocked you, dismissed you, and I was so wrong. You didn't deserve any of it, and yet you helped me when I needed it most. I don't even know how to thank you." She extended the gift bag to him, her eyes welling with tears. "This doesn't even come close to making up for everything. But I hope you'll accept it." And fantasies of my future surfaced in my mind before I fainted. Tom took the bag, his expression softening. He glanced at the card inside before meeting her gaze. "Sarah, thank you. But you don't owe me anything," he said gently. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and move forward." His words were like a balm to Sarah's guilt. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease as Tom smiled warmly. "The truth is, I didn't help you for recognition or because I expected anything in return. I did it because it was the right thing to do." For the first time, Sarah saw Tom not as the man in the red hat she had mocked, but as someone who embodied humility, patience, and grace. Her voice steadied as she replied, "You've taught me more about kindness in these past few weeks than I've learned in years. Thank you, Tom. Truly." In the days that followed, Sarah's behavior began to shift. She made a conscious effort to approach her co-workers with respect and an open mind, actively working to dismantle the biases she had carried for so long. Whenever she found herself slipping into old patterns of judgment, she would think of Tom's calm smile and his words, "What matters is that we learn from them." Sarah's transformation didn't go unnoticed. During a team meeting, she took the opportunity to share her experience, admitting to her colleagues how her prejudices had blinded her. She spoke openly about how Tom's quiet kindness had changed her perspective. "I used to let appearances dictate my opinions," she said. "But now I've learned that true character is what matters, and I owe that lesson to someone who showed me kindness when I least deserved it." The honesty in her words resonated with her coworkers. It sparked conversations about inclusivity and the importance of treating everyone with respect. Sarah's vulnerability inspired others to reflect on their own biases, creating a more compassionate environment in the workplace. As Sarah and Tom's relationship evolved, they developed a bond rooted in mutual respect. Tom became an unofficial mentor to Sarah, sharing his insights on leadership, patience, and empathy. She found herself growing not just as a manager but as a person, crediting Tom's influence for her newfound perspective. Months later, at a company gala, Sarah stood on stage to deliver a speech. She scanned the crowd until her eyes found Tom, seated at a table near the back, his red hat nowhere in sight, but his presence unmistakable. She smiled and said, "Tonight, I want to acknowledge someone who taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my life. Tom, your kindness and humility have not only saved my career, but have reminded me of the importance of seeing the person, not the surface. Thank you." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. After the event, she approached Tom, who stood quietly at the edge of the room. "I hope I didn't embarrass you too much," she teased lightly. Tom chuckled. "Not at all. You've come a long way, Sarah. I'm proud of you." As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened. The woman she was months ago felt like a distant memory. She had learned that kindness could bridge even the deepest divides, that forgiveness had the power to heal, and that the people we least expect often teach us the most profound lessons. She turned to Tom, her voice filled with sincerity. "You've changed my life, Tom. I'll never forget what you've done for me." Tom smiled, his gaze steady and kind. "Just pay it forward, Sarah. That's all I ask." And with that, they parted ways, the sound of laughter and conversation fading into the night. As Sarah walked to her car, she felt a quiet sense of peace. This chapter of her life had been one of mistakes, growth, and redemption. And in her heart, she knew she would carry the lessons she had learned from Tom forever. The story is a profound reminder of how prejudice can blind us, and how kindness has the power to heal and transform. Tom's quiet humility and Sarah's redemption resonate deeply with anyone who has ever experienced or confronted unfair judgment. It shows that even when people treat us poorly, forgiveness and compassion can bridge divides and spark change. This tale encourages viewers to reflect on their own actions and moments when they may have judged others unfairly or been judged themselves. It asks us to think about the times when unexpected kindness transformed our lives, and to acknowledge the courage it takes to admit mistakes and grow. We all have stories of forgiveness, second chances, and unexpected connections. Share yours in the comments below and inspire others with the power of kindness. If this story moved you, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more uplifting tales that remind us of the humanity we all share.